Right. Okay. So I'll get started on that, and many of the names I recognize on the call, so you can say it along with me. The Linux Foundation has an antitrust policy, and you can find the full policy on our website. We show this at the beginning of every meeting. We mention it at the beginning of every meeting, and the purpose of the policy is to ensure that everyone can talk in a comfortable manner. We all know the parameters of how we speak. So it's one of those formalities. It's particularly important for the companies in the US and so on to have this policy up and to ensure that everyone knows about it. If you're from a Linux Foundation member, you can ask our counsel, Andy Updegrove, if you have any questions. And naturally, if you have not specifically difficult legal questions, you can also ask me now.
Okay, thanks for this little notice. So in terms of this web meeting, we have a little meeting netiquette. And actually, it would be great if you type in your name and maybe your company so everyone knows who's in the call, who we are talking to. Please mute your phone when you are not speaking. If possible, please turn on your camera. That's nice to see each other's faces. I mean, if we would sit in a conference room, we would also see each other. So it's easier to interact with each other. And yeah, please participate. So this is a working group meeting. It's not only people who present something, it's about discussions, openly exchange thoughts and challenges, ideas. So if you say, just unmute yourself and participate. Let's look at our little agenda for today. So currently we are here in the welcome and introductions section. Yeah. Afterwards, we want to give a little German market insights and updates, so everyone may join in and bring in their thoughts and tell us what you're seeing, what are your current interests, what are current challenges in terms of open source here in the German market. And then we have a very good lineup for talks. So Shane will give us a compliance market briefing and security market briefing. And then we have two interesting case studies from Philippe and Alexios on tooling and SBOMs. So very happy to have you here in the call and to present your ideas and your updates. And then we are already at the end of the meeting and we'll close at 11 a.m. this morning. So just to get to know each other a little bit better, please do a quick introduction of yourself, only a few seconds, perhaps just by your name and what is your touch point with open source? Are you in the compliance section or security? Are you in the development section, or what is your interest in open source? But very briefly, because otherwise it will take a little bit too much time. But I think it would be nice just to go through, and we would start from the top. If you put in your participants tab, you can see who is currently dialed in, and then we just go from the top to the bottom quickly. So I mean, everyone sees, yeah, okay, yeah. You can see yourself at the top, but let's try to manage it somehow. Let me start. So because I'm here on the top now. My name is Marcel Scholze. I'm head of our open source software service at PwC. So we do consulting and certification auditing work in the field of open source and based here in Germany, working for PwC. So next one I can see is Alexios.
Hi everyone. Hi, I'm Alexios. I saw my name on the top, but I didn't know if it's because it's me or it's alphabetical, so it's both. So yeah, I'm Alexios Zavras. I'm the Chief Open Source Compliance Officer at Intel. I work at the Intel Open Source Program Office, and yeah, I'm based in Munich. And yeah,
Next one is Anastasia.
Hi, my name is Anastasia. I am a German information technology lawyer, but currently I'm working at Rohde & Schwarz in the software compliance department. And we also have some of my colleagues here present. I'm looking forward to the discussions today. Thank you.
Anna, you're the next.
Hello everyone, I'm Anna Schumann from KPMG. I'm an IP/IT lawyer and the OSS compliance officer at KPMG OSPO. Thank you.
And Antje?
Yeah, my name is Antje Luttenberger. I'm working in the OSPO of SAP, and yeah, I'm listening to the session today and will align with my colleagues then afterwards.
Thank you. Christian.
Okay. Hi, I'm Christian Seipel. I'm working at Software AG, and my role is there to do compliance automation. So that means I'm doing with my team working on automating as much as possible for the compliance task, especially the open source compliance and export control compliance.
Good. Christina?
Hello, my name is Christina Kluger. I am a legal counsel at Daimler Truck, and there I'm responsible for IT law and also for the topic free open source software.
Thank you. Christopher, you're next.
Hi there, Christopher De Nicolo. I'm an IT lawyer with a strong focus on open source software.
Thank you. Shane.
Hi, I'm Shane Coughlin. I'm the general manager of the OpenChain project, and I've been working around open source intellectual property for about 17 or 18 years now.
Nice to have you in the call. Daniela, you're next.
Hello Marcel, hello all. I'm Daniela Hansmeier. I'm a legal counsel, IT lawyer at Ella Glaya Mobile Vision GmbH, and I'm also responsible for free and open source software, legal topics. I'm looking forward to today.
Thank you. David.
Hi, I'm David from Mercedes-Benz, and I'm working there as product owner of the disclosure portal, where we centralize disclosure from our internal and external suppliers.
Good, thank you. Dirk? Okay, we cannot hear you, Dirk. In the meantime, we move on to Andreas.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Andreas Kutula, I'm Managing Director of Bitsy. We offer services and consulting around open source management since now almost 15 years. And yeah, I'm very curious for the talks today. Thank you.
Thank you. Guido, you're next.
Hello, I'm Guido Conrad, and I'm working at Wagner and in Hanover, Germany, and I'm working in the compliance team. Thank you.
Holger?
Good morning, my name is Holger Streidel. I'm running the OSPO for the Carl Zeiss AG.
Very good. Ina, your next one, please.
Good morning. Ina Christiansen is my name. I'm an engineer working in automation technology, and I'm responsible for our open source software compliance management.
Okay, good. Richard.
My name is Richard Röhmann. I'm working at Software AG, heading the open source compliance team.
Okay, good. Thank you. Johanna?
Good morning. My name is Johanna. I'm also from Rohde & Schwarz, as my colleague Anastasia told you, and I'm in the software compliance team as well.
Good. So next one, Johannes. We cannot hear you. I think you unmuted yourself, but we cannot hear you. Perhaps it's the wrong microphone or something selected. Yeah, sorry, let's move on with Julian, and Johannes, let's check later on if we can hear you, yeah?
Hey, this is Julian. I'm a project manager at PwC's Open Source Compliance Management Services.
Good. Julius?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Julius Haas, and I'm part of Marcel's team at PwC.
Maike?
Yeah, hello. I'm Maike Felster, and I am part of the CTO office at Daimler Truck, and I'm responsible for all open source topics there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Philipp?
Guten Tag, ich bin Philipp, ich bin Bus, ich bin Franzose und Amerikaner, but I'll continue in English. So I'm working with Nextbee and I maintain open source compliance tools that are themselves open source.
Okay, thank you. You're dialed in from the US?
No, I actually dialed in from Paris.
From Paris,
citizen
okay.
of the world.
Same time zone at least, yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Niesen. I'm the Open Source Compliance Officer at Scheid & Bachmann GmbH, a mid-size family-owned company in the western part of Germany.
Good, thank you. Sebastian?
Good morning. Altogether, I'm Sebastian. I'm an IT lawyer with Nordeman and working quite intensely in open source and based in Berlin. Looking forward to the meeting today.
Good. Stefan?
Hi, my name is Stefan Tanecki. I'm an IT enterprise architect and founding member at the open source office at Volkswagen AG since 2015.
Thank you. Timo.
Hello, my name is Timo Hauswirth. I work with Creditive. It's part of NetApp. And we focus on open source support since 1999 in Germany and open source databases. I'm there in the business development.
Good, thank you. And then last one here on the list, at least, Umo.
Hi, I'm Omo Schwarting. I am working at Carl Zeiss Industrial Quality Solution as an open source coordinator.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So I think someone dropped in while we were doing the introductions already. So please just unmute yourself. And Johannes, you can also try again if it works now.
Hello, I'm also here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes. So thank you. I had some trouble to dial in, but now I succeeded. It's a little bit complicated. So I shortly introduce myself. I'm Lennart Seck. I'm here, the open source compliance officer at BMW. And yes, I'm looking forward for today. Thank you for the invitation.
Perfect. Thanks, Lennart. So did we miss anyone?
I would like to give it another try.
Yep.
So you can hear me now. My name is Dirk Papenberg. I'm working for NTT Data, and I'm working in the IP office responsible for open source compliance.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, and then Johannes' microphone is not working. It seems to be broken, so not an issue here of the conference, but of the microphone perhaps. But in the chat, he wrote to our coordinator, my micro doesn't seem to be working. I'm responsible for license compliance handling of OSS in the Bundesagentur für Arbeit. I don't know how to translate this to English now, but I think Bundesagentur für Arbeit, everyone knows. Huh? Okay. Yes, thanks, Johannes, for being the call as well. Okay. So yeah, thank you for this little round of introductions. Let's move on to the next topic of our agenda today. So we wanted to jointly talk about the current situation of open source here in the German market. And this is for everyone to join in. I want to just to give few insights from our side, and then but everyone please feel free to add and to discuss what's in your mind. So I mean, we met in Cologne last time in November, I think, and since that time I think open source has further, let's say, progressed a little bit, or at least we have had many conversations with clients and requests in terms of SBOMs and SBOM management and good data in SBOMs and how to do the curation, how to have a high quality data in SBOMs. So I think that's on everybody's mind. That's also the topic of the last year, I would say, the whole topic of SBOMs and SBOM management. So this has just proceeded. I don't see any change there. I think that's still very relevant and very central for many companies. Also, we've had many talks with companies who have been working with open source for a long time already, but through this whole hype or this whole discussions of SBOMs in the last year, they realize they also need to pick it up and to manage the topic of SBOMs now more seriously. So that's what we've seen, and also we've seen, Shane, this will be interesting for you as well. We've seen more requests for ISO 5230 certifications or readiness assessments, and to professionalize open source management, and some curious companies asking about the topic of security and the new ISO coming up. So that's basically what we've seen on the market, which is also driven by regulation. And Katharina, perhaps you give us a little bit information on the topics of regulation, what we've seen and what is going on.
Yeah, sure. So what we have here is a short and crisp summary of current regulations or drafts of regulations, which are somehow indirectly or even directly addressing open source and open source management. So the regulations here on this slide, they are not industry specific. However, there is a slight focus on financial regulations. So as you can see, we have, for example, regulations from the BaFin in Germany, like MA Risk or BITE. But we also have regulations on European level, for instance, DORA, which is directly referring to open source, as it says in this document that, for instance, open source scanning would be necessary to ensure that IT systems have digital resilience in the future. We have the European Cyber Resilience Act, which is currently not binding yet, but however in draft mode, which is also pointing to open source and open source management. We also have at the bottom left regulations from the US, for example, for medical devices. Also here, open source compliance has to be ensured. At the bottom right, we have the Open Source Software Act, which was also quite popular at the end of last year, as it is also directly referring to open source and open source management. So this just as a first teaser, what is currently going on, and that you can see that current regulations are grabbing the topic of open source and are directly enforcing open source management. So yeah, it's first inspiration, and I would be happy to jump into discussion with you and to understand which topics around open source are currently on your mind. So might be risks, might be negative aspects, but of course we'd love to hear positive topics enabling benefits of open source.
An interesting note there about the increase in certification, because I've noticed a significant bump in China as well. For example, and I'm hoping everyone here is good at secrets. In the next
water chain.
No, it's fine. When the session recording comes out, all of this will be done. So in the next few days, in a China internal event, we're going to see the announcements of some very significant Chinese companies being third-party certified by CAICT, an organization which is affiliated with the Chinese Ministry of Trade, but it also provides commercial services, and it is an OpenChain third-party certifier. The organizations being announced by them include one of the largest cloud companies in the world and one of the most significant mobile companies in the world. Indeed, when it comes to the size of the subscriber base, it's eclipsing virtually anything else out there. Those are both Chinese, and they also let me know that they've gone and certified an American company, presumably in the Chinese department. Meanwhile, completely independently, another OpenChain partner has flagged that one of the big four automotives in China, in fact, the second largest battery electric vehicle producer in the world and the third largest hybrid producer in the world, is conformant. That's not a secret at all because they've done it through our website. We just haven't blogged about it yet. That's SAIC, Shanghai Motors. Now, I think SAIC was an independent assessment, but the other three are third-party certification. And there's an event which was scheduled for the 31st in China to chat about this to a large audience. And I think that's deferred to the 4th of April now. But anyway, long story short, third-party certification is moving forward in China as well as Germany, which is an interesting and heartening note about things going more entrenched into the supply chain, and in areas like telecommunications, a highly regulated environment. It's noticeable to have supergiants decide, okay, I'm going to third-party certify myself as an endpoint and influence my supply chain that way.
Yeah, very good note, yeah. So someone else here in the call who wants to bring in his or her thoughts or currently pressing topics or questions.
Everyone's still feeling terribly shy. One question for the German market, though, that I do have people present is when it comes to SBOMs, I noticed a slight amount of proliferation. Of course, in the market, we've got, for example, SPDX, an ISO standard for software bill of materials, commonly used in open source. We have the emergence of Cyclone DX, a de facto standard. But I also noticed there are some degrees of perhaps remixes. For instance, Toyota, at least some part of it, was noting that they were using SPDX Lite plus T, which was some type of Toyota-specific additions in that department for their own reasons. And I believe Siemens also has based something on Cyclone DX, but it's actually a Siemens SBOM. So it seems that there's a slight proliferation of SBOM formats at the moment, and that touches on the quality thing, not necessarily in a negative way, but it seems that people are thinking about SBOMs and to some extent trying to think of what's most suitable for their market situation right now. I was just wondering if anyone has noticed an increase in SBOM adoption around them or challenges around it. If everyone's too shy, that's fine. But where I'm leading the conversation is that we are rebooting our tooling group to make an end-to-end map of where open source tooling for open source compliance is. And naturally, the key thing is SBOM ingest and export. And we're trying to identify the blind spots, what's missing, so that we can encourage investment and further development. And this is where market knowledge from Germany, if you're thinking, well, this specific tooling is missing in our domain, in my market space, or with my suppliers, this would be useful. Let our tooling group know. So as we make this map of what's current, and we make this shopping list of what could be next, we can make sure the German market gets what it needs. Alexius's hand is up. That's cool. I didn't know we could do hands up here. That's fun.
Alexius, unmute.
Sorry, it wasn't. It's not the right protocol. I don't know. So, anyway, just a comment since we discussed SBOMs, and if you haven't seen the wonderful announcement yesterday, GitHub now has a button that you can generate an SBOM from your repo, and I put the link to the announcement yesterday. So we expect that lots of people. I mean, we who are spending our time on all this stuff, we already knew how to do that. But now having this, having a button on every GitHub repository that can generate one, we expect that it's going to make the whole thing visible to lots of people. And before you start, opening champagnes, yes, there are many bugs. Yes, it's not all. It doesn't always work for everything. Yeah, but again, it's as you can imagine, it's a hosted service, so any update will become transparent, and it will become better and better.
And Alexius, correct me if I'm wrong, but this service is allowing people to export in SPDX format. So, with one click, they're matching the ISO standard that we have in play in the market. I saw the announcement. I was blown away. I actually didn't know it was coming, so I was very excited to see it in Korea. And it sounds like suddenly now we have potentially millions of tiny code bases, but let's say thousands of large code bases able to provide SBOMs at source, which is a phenomenal step forward.
Yeah, as you said, it generates SPDX in JSON format. Again, it's not perfect, and it doesn't work on every time. Let's not get, too excited, but
what we need is good, not perfect.
Yeah. The major thing is that it brings visibility, right? And so people who have never heard of this before will see in their GitHub a new button and say, what does it do? And we can start discussing these things.
It's amazing because something like OpenChain, we've always said the end game is that the start of the supply chain can provide the basic needed information. And this is fundamental. I notice other hands are up. So I see Leonard first and then David. Perhaps we can do it in that order.
Thank you. Yes, here is Leonard. I think I was just listening this week to Japanese colleagues about the SPDX Lite definition. And I think it's a great thing to have things like that because it's also a thing of, I would say, easy of use and the main things you need for contents of a SBOM. I think what SPDX is a great definition, and I would like to think about to make something of profiles of SPDX. What do I mean with a profile? With a profile, I think it would be something like how to use the SPDX or the for a SBOM description. Look, you have two ways of defining open source issues from a software package. One is, I would say, it's something like general purpose SPDX files, which would I say it's if you look at, for example, a BusyBox, a general purpose SPDX file would something like which describes the BusyBox in a depth. So all parts of something like which are part of BusyBox are described, for example, in a general purpose SPDX. And then on the other side, you could have a profile which is SPDX file use as compliance artifacts, which I mean, when I take as, for example, BusyBox, I take only a part of it. And this is one profile of how to define SPDX, which is then describes my real SBOM, which might not be 100% of BusyBox in this example, which is, for example, only 15 or 20% of this. And this is something like a profile, which is the compliance artifact, which is something like a distillation of information, which describes all the things which I need to be compliant, which means the concluded licenses, the real license which are inside, and also the real package which I'm describing there. So that would be, I think, maybe discussion for SPDX working group, something like that, or maybe even it does exist, but I would think about profiles.
Oh, I can sidetrack the whole conversation and spend hours here. So yes, SPDX version 3 has profiles, and yeah, please talk to me, and yeah let's not get rid
I'm
of
guessing
that.
once we hit our state of the SBOM moment, we're going to have
Yes.
probably a touch on the profiles and how, like, compliance, security, AI, you know. I noticed David and Anna have their hands up as well.
So, okay. Anna, would you like to go first, or shall I?
Go ahead, you were first.
All right. So let me share some insights and challenges that we have recognized during build-up of that disclosure portal that we will start to roll out through the different IT units of Mercy Dispense during course of this year. So first of all, it is a challenge that the different software composition analysis tools out there don't have a shared and common knowledge base of the open source components. So we will receive different metadata on the same components from different suppliers, depending on the tooling and knowledge base they use, also for ourselves. So we have implemented SBOM comparison functionality to also identify that and then find the single truth. And there can't be two or more truths out there. And as we don't see any single spot where that information is condensed, could be clearly defined or somewhere else. That's something that we consider as a common challenge throughout all industries. So this is one thing, the knowledge base of the open source components out there. Another thing I would like to mention is SPDX relies on those SPDX identifiers, and these rely on what Linux Foundation considers as an open source license. And so we have a database of 500 and something of licenses, and there are many further licenses out there, and we receive different identifiers from different composition analysis tools. And even if Linux Foundation does not consider them as true open source licenses, it would already be helpful to have at least a phone book for those licenses, having one common identifier that we could pick then. So for the time being, we have solved that by some aliasing mechanism. But I could imagine that this will touch more than just us. So when you start on managing SBOM at scale, you will, I assume, run into that issues as well. And so the last point that I would now like to mention is, and yes, GitHub started to do SPDX, and we will see what GitLab is doing, and we will see what all the others are doing. And many say, hey, we have implemented the NTIA basic requirements. And then I say, okay, please put in the copyright information as well, so that we can really work with that data. And then they say, yes, we will do in future. And I always wonder, why in future, and why don't we come to a common denominator of what license compliance, of what cybersecurity, and of what technology management demands from us? Because I'm product owner not just for license compliance, but for the other stakeholders as well. And so I need the copyright information, and I need the package URL, and I need component name and version, and so on. And I would love to see a convergence of the cybersecurity people and the license compliance people. And depending on the different vendors, I see that one is in the majority, the other steps back. And that's also something I would love to see a change in that. Okay, so I quickly sum up because I did now take a lot of talking. I think the knowledge bases are a problem. I think unique identifiers common would be really good, and have a more common set of those information that we would love to all have, merging cybersecurity and license compliance. Thank you for listening so long. And excuse, I'm working from, not working, I'm having a vacation week, and so I'm working from my wife's suing office.
Now, I just want to clarify on the second point one thing. SPDX does have a license list for the identifiers, but it doesn't constitute Linux Foundation defining what's an open source license or not. We're not an authority on that. There are people who define what's an OSS license. For instance, Open Source Initiative have their open source definition and a license list based on that. Free Software Foundation has the free software definition and a license list based on that. But specifically SPDX, which does have a license list, that includes licenses which are under the OSI list, or are under the FSF list, or aren't. So some licenses, like let's say, I've just pulled up the page on my side, there's an Amazon Digital Services license. It's not OSI or FSF. And I'm sure Alexius can correct me if I'm wrong, but the SPDX license list can be expanded, and it's at version 3.20 right now. So anyway, long story short, SPDX has a license list, but it's not Linux Foundation saying these are what's open source. It's a list of licenses that are commonly found and exceptions, and they're given identifiers. And you can be part of updating that list and flagging licenses that are OSI, FSF, or not. So I think it's a case of, David, if you've got data, the SPDX community would love to know what licenses you're running into, and you'd like to have
just have a look at the scan code list, for example, and do a difference, and you will find, I don't know, hundreds of licenses which are not on the SPDX list.
Yeah. So Philip knows that scan code contributed this list to SPDX. So yeah, if you really want to help us and put them all in, yes, please do. But yeah. So
how's the process of putting additional licenses in?
You just raise a ticket and you put it there, and we have an online tool for that.
Okay, and so I provide the license text.
Yes.
And then, okay.
It will be reviewed by the SPDX legal team, right?
Okay.
So I put the link to the license inclusion. So, for example, if it's only proprietary and binary, no, it will not be there, right? But almost everything else, it has to be, used by at least 2 projects or something like that. We have a list of criteria where we do this, but.
That's great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
would love to have that.
Yeah. The effort that we're now doing is the Fedora people are putting every license of every software in Fedora in, right? That's why we have it now. I think we have a little more than 500 licenses. We're getting more every day, but yeah, please contribute.
Yes.
Sounds like
And
David,
so,
you've
so this is
identified.
Philippe.
Go ahead.
I maintain scan code and the scan code license database. And to the point you just made, there's about an extra 1,500 license in scan code that are not in SPDX. We've been looking for years to get these in SPDX. The barrier to entry to get license in SPDX, I'm sorry to be a party pooper, Alexios, is so high that it goes against efficiency in a business when you find code that's used under any license or things as mundane as a public domain. You don't care whether it's on the SPDX license list or not. You don't care whether it meets the license inclusion principles. You want to track this because you have legal obligations that you have to fulfill. And so I'm a bit frustrated there, but don't say it's easy because that's not easy. If it were easy, there would be 2,000 licenses in SPDX today. And SPDX also has been making taking a stance to decide what is open source and what is not open source based on their license inclusion principle. So, and it's different from what the FSF or the OSI thinks is open source. So there's a problem there, and it's been very rightly brought forward by David because it's a very practical industry problem.
So it's a good note, Philip, and this conversation indicates, I think, a couple of things. One is perhaps we can provide feedback to the SPDX team that discoverability of the way to update the license list could be improved. And second of all, that perhaps the mechanism and or speed of updating the list could be improved. I noticed Alexios was unmuted, so I don't mean to talk over you, Alexios.
Yeah, no, just on the last point that Philippe made, again, SPDX does not define what is open source, and we definitely have licenses there that do not meet the open source definition of other things, right? So if a license is in SPDX license lists, do not assume that it's open source by any other definition of open source. It's a license list, right?
That's a good
some
point.
criteria.
Okay, so do you have the license for the Microsoft Visual Studio, for instance, which is a widely used tool, which is very well. Why?
But Philip, I think what you're hitting on here isn't a definition.
Yeah.
But what you're hitting on isn't whether a thing is defined as open source. You're hitting on whether a thing meets the criteria for being in a list, which also includes not open source. But I guess that those criteria are providing a barrier in your perspective to expanding the list. And I guess we need to find out what the criteria are so we can maybe provide feedback on how it can be changed. If
be my guest, if you can help change that, go for it. I'll be super happy. I've been working on that for years without any success. So please do.
Would it be possible, Philippe, to work with you a little bit to identify, just as a conversation, to work with you offline and maybe talk through some of the pain points you found on licenses, which you see a lot and aren't on the list as well, so I can have a few in the notes. And I'll ask the SPDX steering committee specifically what are the criteria to expand this list. And we can kind of compare and contrast whether we have a situation where expanding the license list, those criteria are preventing us getting some useful data corpus.
Yeah, I would support
this
discussion.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I would support this discussion from my view. So we have SPDX license defined, own license defined, which are like 60%, 70% of the licenses we use are self-defined licenses because they are not in SPDX. I think the quantity of appearance is a better criterion, like as open source, because for security, Microsoft also may play a role, not only open source.
I know that,
So,
for instance, for Microsoft, there's only 3 licenses: limited public license, public license, the can't say this word now. Reciprocal license, but not, for instance, the one you like.
Anyway, Shane, sorry to interrupt, but I'm welcoming any discussion there. I think that more useful than having me, because I've not been successful in getting anything moving forward, is having constituents and users which feel the pain, whether it's Richard or David or others, which have been bringing back this topic to me hundreds of times. That's up to them to actually make their voice known.
Absolutely, and this is one reason we have these meetings. Ultimately, you own SPDX, the user companies. It's there for you. So if there's a situation where something is a blocker, essentially, as Philippe said, we provide feedback, and the more user companies providing feedback, the better for adjusting policy and processes. So, Philippe, David well flagged, and I want to continue that conversation offline to open up a channel with the SPDX team, get their criteria, and provide practical suggestions on how maybe we can make sure that corpus is more comprehensive to reflect what user companies need.
Would love to collaborate with you on that. Thank you, Shane.
Let's do it. And thank you both. That's really useful for me. I'm sure in Japan, China, Korea, we'll be having similar feedback as I discuss with those constituents.
Great, thank you. Yes.
Anna's hand must be tired. It's been up for 5 minutes.
Luckily, it's just a digital hand, right? My concern goes to S-bombs as well, but maybe a slightly different topic. It's the quality of S-bombs that's really bothering me. It's a lot of manual work and a lot of effort to, in the end, provide let's say clean SBOM, because even if you use commercial tools, there are a lot of blank spaces, wrong attributions, no copyrights or wrong copyright information. So what we are doing is blacklisting libraries and components which are not providing proper attributions and notices. That helped a lot to blacklist those components and just simply kick them out of development right from the start to make it easier for the SBOM at the end. But what we actually see as well is that that the SBOMs that are being provided to us are also of a mediocre quality, let's call it like that. So even with bigger companies where you wouldn't expect that there might be some quality issues, there are a lot of blank spaces. So the tooling is, I think, a big issue because the tools are still not that good that they're able to find I would be happy with 90% or 95% because the manual work that is involved is quite a lot, I think. So I think the tooling needs improvement, and I think it would actually help if the community would start blacklisting components that don't provide proper notices and attributions. That would root the problem at its core, right?
And I think that's a good point as well, Anna, because OpenChain fundamentally is about supply chain management. So we are heavily biased towards corporate product to market, solution to market. And if we've got a continual problem, we have to think of the mechanisms to resolve it. And something like having the community organically identify and then say, okay, this is a serious enough problem that enough of us are having a problem with it and we're finding it difficult to manage in the supply chain. I think that type of feedback might be actually a positive pressure to get people to clean up their act. And when it comes to OpenChain, we've always had the image that fundamentally the customer companies will lean on the supplier companies, and then more generically, the supply chain. That would include projects to gradually fix things and starting at a low bar, but raising those boats up together and continually improve. And if something is manifestly being left behind or never tries, then we have a supply chain problem and we need to fix it.
Yeah, but the problem is in the basics, right? So if you use some Alpine packages and there are no copyrights, and you know exactly, okay, this component was built 25 years ago, and you don't even know whether the authors are still alive, to make it extreme, right? But so how are you going to get proper copyright notices, right? That's actually a big issue.
Absolutely. And it's one that in our industry we ignored for far too long. Just like we ignored security, we kind of kicked the ball down the line and we're like, it'll be fine and we'll improve it later. And then the question is, as you said, everyone's gone, perhaps dead. How do we improve this now? Because we can't add a copyright license to something if we're not the copyright holder. We can't clarify a vague statement. We're not the copyright holder. Real issue. Well, it's why we're here. It's why we talk about these things. It's like the SPDX license list expansion discussion. We want to debug these things and provide feedback and help them improve. Brilliant. Rebecca's hand is up.
I would like to add something to that. In fact, even if we aren't the authors, we can do just at another place. And when we look into the code, when we open the source code and find in the code headers there's some copyright notice, then we can add that to places like clearly defined without asking the component project owners. But then we would have that curated information even if the project isn't capable of providing that. And that's what I meant with beyond where we have the notice, where we have all that ready. That's fine. And at the other places, it's also, I think, we are in charge of providing that contribution to the projects, sending a pull request or providing the metadata elsewhere.
Absolutely, if it's possible. But I'm guessing Anna's also referring to the situations where we have code, it's in play, but when we get to the source, there's actually no license in place. Like maybe there's been a sequence.
Oh, okay, that's a different thing.
Right.
That's the thing with a lot of Alpine packages or all those Ubuntu packages. That's a nightmare from a copyright and licensing perspective. So whenever we can open the source and see header files, we do actually try to fix that, but there's a whole lot of components which are beyond fixing from my point of view.
Okay, sorry for the misunderstanding. Okay.
No, not at all. I mean, I think it's, David, it's like 50% of the problem, more than 50% of the problem is no one bothered to make the proper disclosure notices available to discover, right? So they might have made a note in the source somewhere, but there's no licenses file and so on. And then there's that other separate adjacent problem where we're actually then missing the actual grants. So, I mean, you weren't wrong. It's just a case of we have at least two issues in play. And partially that's one of the reasons that software bills of material, SPDX being one example, but there's others, of course, that they came to market and why the community started building them to think, how do we identify something like license information, copyright information. But occasionally we just literally hit a gap, and we can only fix it if we can find the originators and say to them, there's a gap. Is this actually GPL too? Rebecca, perhaps.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I would like to say that I fully support Anna's point of view. We face exactly the same issues. It's a big nightmare and such a lot of manual work at the moment. But I would also like to add a further different point to the discussion, which is I mean, we are all the time talking about the delivery of copyright and license information, what's definitely for most of the open source components like kind of the basic obligations we need to fulfill. But there are even more obligations, right, in a lot of open source licenses. Most prominently maybe the obligation to deliver the source code. And what is, from my perspective, missing at the moment, like on the tooling market, is a match of the components being used or the libraries being used, the license, and the obligations to be fulfilled, like an overview of the obligations that are related to the license that has been identified upon a specific component. And this is something maybe some of you can also share your view on this or your experience yet. But I haven't seen so far like a provider. We are also using commercial tuning, by the way, like delivering the whole picture to us.
I think there's a lot of hesitation to summarize the obligations in licenses because there's a slight nervousness from parties that they'd be taking liability for telling you what is right and what isn't. And then if someone else interpreted the license, especially a judge, and said, actually, you summarized it wrong, then suddenly the, let's say, commercial provider would be on the hook for making a horrible mistake. However, there is an initiative in Germany to fix this. That's the good news. OSADL are making summaries of the license obligations, and they're doing it in a community manner. They're not saying that this is definitely going to be, absolutely correct, but they are doing it. And that is raising the potential for hooking it into hubs of software. And people would be familiar with the proprietary software like Black Duck Hub, but there's open source software hubs like Fosslight Hub, which came from LG in Korea, where it could identify the license, then you click that and you get a quick summary. So we're at the cusp of this, Rebecca, and I think that the fact that you raised that you need it, we need your voice to essentially pull these things together. OSADL's license lists, let's say tooling dashboards, whether commercial or non-commercial, and a disclaimer saying, yeah,
exactly.
In case the list is wrong.
All right, thank you.
I can add also a remark from our work on that. We have looked at the OSADL offering, and they have built up a domain-specific language which was very complex to read, and so we have also looked at too long didn't read legal, and we have also looked at the knowledge base provided from our software composition analysis, and the problem was that our own internal department had a different point of view on some of the things written there, which are interpretations. And so we decided to go for our own, reflecting our own interpretations of the licenses, and also let's call it risk appetite, which is also different from company to company. And so we have noticed all that, and it's good to have that, also to have a comparison of different point of view. And we decided then to go on our own.
Yeah, David, and I think the thing is not only a question of interpretation, but it's always a question of whether a country-based law is included as well. So you won't find a general summary of all obligations since the copyright principles are different worldwide. So you will always need to have a country-specific interpretation of some obligations, and this might, and that is where I'm exactly with you, David. This is a question of risk appetite to a very big degree.
And different depending on your distribution model and kind of product that you're doing. Yeah.
Exactly. And a really simple example is that more than one lawyer in Spain said that under Spanish law, which of course we must put proviso, first of all, civil law, as is much of Europe, as opposed to common law in the US and UK. But in the Spanish civil law, it would appear that it's pretty clear that GPL2 is a contract, where many American lawyers insist that GPL2 is not a contract. And that's going to be a situation where the company would have to position itself to deal with it not being a contract in one geography, but being a contract in the other. It just leads, David, to the combination of risk appetite, distribution knowledge, and then thinking, does it matter to me or not whether it's a contract? Is there going to be a business impact?
Sorry,
I'm sure go ahead, I'm afraid. Sorry.
If I may add one additional point to it. I fully understand that, of course, in-depth analysis is very, very hard to do at this point, depending on jurisdictions and so on. But yeah, at least it would already be helpful to have like a very simple sheet saying, okay, obligation A, B, C is included, so that's it. And then each company can decide for themselves how to cope with this information and what to do with it, and go further into it and provide some further analysis for the specific need of each company.
So just to interject there briefly, Rebecca, we have in Deja Code, which is today a proprietary tool, the base of all the license in scan code, which have been carefully reviewed and tagged for obligations. And there's a mechanism where, so we provide that as a base, and you can customize it to your needs. And we're also working to release Deja Code as open source in 2023.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Very good news.
Good news.
So, but I strongly encourage you to have a look at that, because there's quite a bit of work that's done. It covers all the scan code license, and there's a mechanism where licenses are categorized. You can tag the text to relate to category and a tag to a specific section in the text. We provide a base, and that's something that can then be adapted and customized by your legal department. It's been designed for this.
I think that's good information and good news. We have some discussions going on here, but we also have some other topics on the agenda. I think we see that next time we need to we need to have some more time for general discussions, and also perhaps we can put some of these topics on the agenda for our next meeting. But I think it would make sense also to move on now. Shane, actually your time is already up more or less in terms of the agenda, but do you want to give us a brief information and perhaps only a few minutes, and then we can move on to the other ones, or how do we do it best?
Yes, and while this has been a super productive conversation, really important, but I did in the back of my mind think, wow, Marcel must have been having a stroke there.
All good. I mean, we're here to share. And
We are. And I think we found some really good stuff that we can go on the tooling front, license interpretation, and SBOMs. And that's really what I'm going to touch on, global overview and security, in about 3 minutes.
Very good.
The simple thing is that we've seen an awful lot of market penetration of, let's say, ISO 5230, a process management standard. And it's not because we've got a perfect solution for making all open source compliance definitely perfect in the supply chain, no more problems, resources never waste, etc., etc. But it's good enough to clear up all of the major problems that people have been running into as a brick wall for years. And I think that's an indicator that the market had huge pent-up demand, enormous amounts of resources wasted, and then a simple, clear standard allowed that to essentially be undammed and the water to flow of the supply chain more efficiently. And whether it's a company getting third-party certified, or a company self-certifying, or suppliers just little by little using bits of the standard, all these pain points are reducing. That's the biggest global picture available for the OpenChain project. Something that is good enough to dramatically reduce resource waste and dramatically increase fidelity has solved for the real market challenge at play. The license compliance standard has been joined by a security assurance standard, and that has also seen increased traction. We had some wonderful announcements of companies from our partner ecosystem very early on supporting the security standard. So, certifiers like Buno Veritas, CAICT, PwC, and Orcro, and consultancies like OSS Consultants, Source Code Control, and that continued with, for instance, BitC announcing as well. Anyway, long story short, the license compliance standard really worked. People then said we need security. We made a sister standard for security, and that's building momentum. And with conformance announcements like Interneuron, a software supplier to the health service in the UK, and BlackBerry going whole entity conformant on the security standard, the momentum is good. And I was just talking with one of the main companies in Korea. They're conformant on the security standard as well as the license compliance standard, and they're just deciding what's their favorite date to announce. All of that is very hearty and healthy. And when it comes to why we have an ISO standard for license compliance, just like all of this conversation, it's a practical market reason. Procurement contracts. We want a number that the procurement department easily puts into their contracts, and a number that the receiving sales team is just like, okay, yet another ISO number. And that mechanism moves us out of, oh, we need to be open source people, we need to be cognizant of this ecosystem, into hand off to people who add it to the procurement cycle. They don't need to even know what open source is, they just need to know that the company now needs this ISO standard. And that's what we're doing with the security standard. And very recently, our de facto security standard got its DIS number from ISO, its Draft International Standard number. And it's the very short mouthful of ISO IEC DIS 18974. Easy. And what is good about that is that now we know what the final ISO number will be. It'll be ISO IEC 18974. So we can already prep with the procurement people who don't know about OSPOs and don't know about open source. We can prep them this new incoming ISO number. You should have second half of this year when we expect the standard in play. That's the big picture of what's going on. When it comes to any interesting notes, I mentioned in China, tons of third-party conformance of massive entities coming online. I am aware that in Europe, we have some automakers about to announce conformance of what they're up to, and we are seeing increased traction in areas like finance and defense. What is fascinating, and we've had to rebuild our website and reference library to try and address this demand, is we've moved beyond the parameters of the open source community, we've moved beyond the knowledge base, and we're now noticing corporations which have no background or personnel around open source per se are aware they're using open source, aligning with our standards, and needing really simple discovery of how do I find the standard, how do I understand it, how do I certify, how do I get training material, etc., etc. So a lot of what we're doing this year is discovery, refinement, and improving those onboarding for the companies further and further in the supply chain or in industries that were distant. Your help would be deeply appreciated. Some fantastic work done by Marcel and others as we've seen translations in Germany come online. We've seen the Chinese government lean heavily into what we're doing. They had online availability of self-certification for the security standard within 18 hours of the English version. So everything is looking good, but we will need to work with you as we reach tens of thousands of companies, making sure they can discover things easily when they don't even know how to play with the community. They're not sure that they can turn up in a call like this and ask quote unquote stupid questions. And we like it, we want to help. So people are learning, and that's the big lift for us. The end. Marcel, over to you.
Thanks, Shane, for this flexibility and wrapping up so quickly. Yeah, and thanks for the overview. And I think not only us, but many others are also looking forward to the new ISO for security. We are already discussing with many people this new standard, and I think in particular because security is so important, or has become so important after beginning of last year, this will be a big step for standardizing the mechanisms that are required.
And we're bumping into some giants, just as a sub note. I mentioned people like CAICT, but just recently another third-party certifier was announced in China, CESI, again under Ministry of Trade. But this is the organization that makes the national standards for China. So not only engaging with the local standards, but the organization that determines what the Chinese government is saying is a national standard. So we're seeing the whales moving into our domain and playing with us, which is very remarkable, and it indicates we're on the right path.
Good. So let's move on to Philippe. Shane, I think you have the moderator ball right now. Oh no, it's back to me. Okay, I can move it to Philippe somehow. Philippe, I guess you want to share some slides, yeah?
Exactly, yes.
Okay, and you will be talking about state of the tooling in open source automation.
Yes. And so sorry if there's maybe some slowness on my side because I'm running Linux on my laptop and WebEx didn't work okay, so I had to run inside a Windows virtual machine. So there's a lot of software interaction and latency. So you tell me if the sound is not good.
The sound is good and we can see your slides.
Great, great. I won't be so adventurous as to share my video, but all right. Try this. I don't think you can do both at the same time, actually. All right. So I wanted to share a few trends and insights I've observed on open source tooling specifically. So quick words about me. I'm the maintainer and creator of ScanCode that some of you may be using. I'm also co-founder of SPDX and Clearly Defined, and I'm behind a mini standard called Package URL. And so I've been quite involved in open source tooling. And based on the discussion we've had, I know if I'm part of the solution or part of the problem, maybe a bit of both. It's definitely a domain where I think there's good things happening, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and I hope I can help to do some of it. So I'm still struggling a bit to get this to display correctly. I'm not a Windows person, so I'm all lost.
It's fine. It's fine. We can see the slides. It's big enough.
Okay, so let's hope they're good enough. All right. So open source compliance tooling, of course. I hope this is not something that needs explanation, but what I'm talking specifically is about open source compliance tooling that is itself open source, and because I think this is the way. And it's both free as in beer, but also as in freedom. So we're talking about mostly code, but also data. And when I heard before this discussion the issues that several of you are facing with data quality in general and the lack of central knowledge base. I mean, all these are themes that resonate with me a lot, and that I'm going to address here in a sec. Let's not forget the data. Let's not forget the data, but also let's not forget that the data should be themselves open data. The thing about open source tools is that because you have less friction and you can pick and choose and assemble and combine together different tools reasonably easily, much more easily than if you were doing this with a single vendor commercial solution or multi-vendor commercial solution, is that you have the opportunity to adapt the size and the process of your automation to what you need and to your open chain, as opposed to have kind of one size fits all. And last but not least is that in the space of software composition analysis, license compliance and application security, in many areas, the best-in-class tools are themselves open source. So in some case, it's going to be a must-have than to use open source tools. Okay, so that being out of the way, what would be the key trends I see today? I think we're roughly at the third wave of compliance tooling, be it creation or adoption. And the first wave was really the early commercial tools around 2000, early 2000, especially with Black Duck. The second wave has been centered around license, compliance, and legal. And the third wave that we are in today, I think, is centered around the needs of developers, being able to involve them, and application security. What I hope is that eventually we'll see emerging a balanced and holistic approach and solution that can handle both license compliance and security, and that are developer friendly. It's difficult to be both legal, security, and developer friendly at the same time. But eventually, I think we'll see some of these emerge. And by the way, feel free to interrupt me at any time. It's a discussion, so it's not like something which needs to be a doctoral presentation. And if you don't hear me, please speak at any time. Okay, other key trend. Of course, security is top of mind in many companies because of the very high profile supply chain attacks we've seen over the last year, of course, with Log4j, but it's been continuing since, and there was a lot of issues before. We see SBOMs being discussed and used everywhere or created everywhere. Good example is the GitHub announcement yesterday or a couple of days ago about making this available. The problem is for what, and even more than that is what do you do with that? I was recently at FOSDEM in Brussels in late January, early February, and I anchored a workshop on open source compliance tooling, and there was also a dev room specifically on SBOMs. And in this dev room, when the question was asked, there were about 50 people, open source tool developers and users. The question was, hey, who can read SBOM? There were only two arms raised in the room. So the problem is that there's a lot of talk about it. I think it's great that there's discussion. There's a lot of issues yet to solve there. And even if security is top of mind, I don't think license compliance is solved. And I hear you discussing about some of the issues you're facing, and yes, it's not solved. There's a huge amount of work left for automation. There's eventually scripting platforms that can help over time capture your pipelines and orchestrate many different tools. I'm thinking about ORT, things like FOSLite or what I'm doing with Scancode.io, which is going to be a way to capture your knowledge and your process specific so you can better automate them, but still huge amount of work to do there. About trends around data, eventually I think open data and data sharing will happen. The problem is a matter of centralized versus decentralized and control, and who controls it. There's two efforts going on right now, one through Ozadol and Siemens called Ocelot to share SPDX, curated SPDX SBOMs on GitHub as documents. The other one is ClearDefine. I'm one of the co-founders of ClearDefine. I'm not sure, they're great, they're useful maybe, but I'm not sure any of these initiatives is yet hitting the right spot of what I would like to have as an end user and what you likely want to have as an end user in terms of reusable data and reference knowledge base and curated information about this package that has been abandoned 25 years ago, but we all agree comes from John Doe. It's not there yet. The question is going to be, is this going to be something that has to be centralized under a control of a few or decentralized? I'm more in the decentralized category. Other trend, issues of health of a software package, its quality of its code and processes, whether it's sustainable, abandoned. They're really important on a practical basis, but they're not yet on the radar. There's more issues to deal with still with security and licensing. I think eventually they will come. In terms of open source tooling, we're still badly missing proper web and GUI apps on top of mostly command line tools. And as much as I love command line, I'm a developer, this is not always the most friendly way to interact with a tool, especially when we see the explosion of the number of open source packages we use in any system or apps, where we typically very quickly reach 5,000, 10,000 in any serious complex backend application or embedded device. I think there's a small trend to move towards slowly the analysis of not only the source but also the build and the binaries. It's not there yet, but I think in the long run, because of the complexity of the build systems and the complexity of how source is transformed in binaries, looking at the binaries first, understanding the build on the binaries will eventually displace the analysis of source only. Take a Java application, you may have a few, or Java or JavaScript, you may have a few hundreds of files in the source side. And when you build and deploy the application, you may have thousands of packages which are provisioned from NPM, from Maven, or using private or public repositories. But the thing is that there may be half of these which are used for development. They're tools, they're there to transpile TypeScript to JavaScript and all that kind of good thing. But they're not parts of the redistribution obligation if you think about deploying an application or redistributing a product. And being able to understand very accurately what is the parameter of software package which are reused, for which I have obligations when I need to convey to a third party, what is the set of license that I need to comply with. This is really important. It's very difficult to do on the source side. More and more, it's going to be more efficient to instrument the builds, work on binaries to avoid these kind of issues. And as much as I would like this to be solved, and I'm building a few tools in the space, dependency tracking, generally dependency management is not yet solved. And that's a problem because we're using more and more of this. So not a positive trend always, but that's what I see. So I think otherwise the best tools are free and open source. And most of the new tools are going to be free and open source first. So license detection, of course, I maintain scan code, so I know a thing or two about that. But also when you think about Docker image and container analysis, I don't think there's better than the many open source tools that exist in the space, or being able to detect package parse, package manifest, track dependencies and resolve them. All the tools there are open source first. The problem is that you have to be careful because everybody is building tools in the space, but there's a lot of tools that are potentially shallow and look only skin deep. Take an example, I'm not picking specifically on GitHub, but it's just very widely known, used, and visible. Take the license permission provided by GitHub on a given repository. It's really looking skin deep at a few files and detecting whole licenses. It doesn't provide information about copyright, it doesn't go and find anything beyond the top level README copying license file. So it's not really typically suitable for serious license or security work. The same thing happens in many cases, again, with packaged and dependency detection tracking. So the tools are open, so please, before you engage into picking this or that tool, make sure you do a bit of your homework, because there may be a lot of shiny objects out there, but a lot of them are very shallow. It's easy to get something going quickly, but getting something that's correct and works at scale and is business grade is a bit more complex. Another key trend is poor data quality. Some of you alluded to that, so it's probably not news to you. There's a lot of projects, be they commercial or open source, that are trying to provide either vulnerability or package data. The problem is that everybody's rushing there and trying to get something, and I can't remember who said that earlier on, but the problem is that there's no single source of truth. In the domain of vulnerability database, I maintain a tool called Vulnerable Code, which is open source. So part of the rush, except it's been out there for a few years now, we have a way to compare vulnerabilities that come from different databases and which package are affected by this. And we see when we can compare Snyk, OSS Index from Sonatype, GitHub, GitLab, Google OSV, debs.dev, and a few other data source plus vulnerable code, that there's no two database of vulnerabilities that agree on which package version is affected by this vulnerability and which package version is actually fixing this vulnerability. So it's a total mess. It's really a shit show. It's a bit, so there's really this rush, but everybody is rushing forward to put something out no matter what, and there's a lot of compromise on data quality. I think size does not matter in knowledge base. Quality matters first. I don't care in having, for instance, a database of 100 million Git repositories if in my business I only use 20,000 components. What I care for is ensuring that I have quality data on the 20,000 components that I use, and the 5,000 I will be using a year from now. But I don't care about the rest of the world. And the problem is that everybody cares about size first and having a bigger database, but it doesn't matter. Quality matters. And as I said, we've seen in the world of security, but the same applies to license, where you have database that make up the existence of packages. But when it comes to security, if you have a vulnerability that affects a package that doesn't exist, no big deal, right? Nobody's using it. But it's scary. The other thing is made-up versions and made-up version ranges for versions that don't exist. So all these are source of problem. So please make sure you compare open source solution in the mix, because I think that many tools that are commercial and sell premium quality data are not always worth their price. On the licensing side, I was talking about skin deep. The quality here is very limited and shallow. Most of the commercial tools we see are looking only at the declared license in the package manifest, and can't remember who talked about that, but if you look at this information, for instance, in Debian or in particular Alpine package, this is like almost like a joke, the quality of the data you have there. So if you have a check mark in a tool that says, oh, we have licensed data, check, that's great from a marketing perspective, but make sure you look deeper than skin deep. They also often have a focus on built-in policies, which says, everything that's GPL is bad. They're trying to sell you FUD, and GPL is not bad. You cannot build a serious embedded device based on Linux today without using GPL, so it's not bad. The thing is you need to make sure you can control how you use it, and the purpose and how things are used matter more than many of the open source license.
But Philippe,
Yes.
The way I know the tools, or at least the commercial tools, you don't have to rely on the built-in policies. You can just rewrite them so that GPL is not always bad. So at least we don't categorize GPL as always bad, just in certain circumstances. Let's say it like that. But I think the built-in policies to use them would be quite dangerous because you always have to specify it to the use case.
Yeah, completely. I 100% right. Yeah. But you see, when you see all the demonstrations of commercial tools, usually whenever there's a screen about license, you see a red flag raised for GPL all the time, and that just bothers me. I mean, it's not the reality of how we use GPL code to build software products which are of commercial nature. So it's good that they can be customized, of course, because otherwise that would be pretty terrible.
Yeah, I think
that's
go
ahead.
That's nice marketing, right? The red flag and the scary copyleft is a good selling point, right?
Yeah. Except that in practice, it doesn't help. The way you use the tool, the way whether it's being included or not, how things are linked, there's a lot of subtleties that you all know about, which are important. But most of the vendors just skim through, says, oh, we have super policy management, blah blah blah. So just make sure you double check with. And go a bit more than skin deep in this case to make sure you can pick the right stuff. So another key trend, and I'm pretty proud of that because that's something that started in scan code and Vombo code. It's something called Perl or package URL, and it's emerging as an essential glue between software composition analysis tools. It's a very tiny string that looks like a URL to identify a software package. It doesn't cover every possible use case, but it works very well for the command case where you use well-known open source package from well-known package managers. And it's very helpful because it helps handle correctly and easily the command case. It's being used now and adopted in CycloneDX, in SPDX. If you look in details at the GitHub SBOM, SPDX SBOM that's just been released, you'll see they make heavy use of package URLs to identify the packages and provide SPDX refs. It's used by Google OSV, which is a vulnerability database, which also use some of our code from vulnerable code, by the way. We're coming up with a new package URL database. The intent is trying to have a way to establish a repository, so it's an open source tool, but eventually with the data also, and match code, which is a matching tool supporting by that. But the point I'm making is that because all these tools are using package URL, you have a way to pick and choose, combine, and eventually avoid some vendor lock-in. If you have a better tool tomorrow, if it still supports package URL, you may be able to integrate that very easily in your tool chain. So it's awesome. Use my tools that use that, use everybody else's tools that use that, and you can then mix and match and choose that. If you use commercial vendors, make sure you demand them to include and incorporate these, because that's going to be a way to avoid lock-in, and it's really important for interoperability. And by the way, I'm saying is the assertion glue. That's not me saying that. I've heard that from somebody else, one of the VP of research at the Linux Foundation, and Steve Pringett, which is the leader of the Cyclone DX project, said the same thing. Okay, some key insight, and let's zip through that because we're a bit late. Some quotes that came from this workshop we had in Brussels almost 2 months ago now. Everyone wants to share the data or reuse the data, and everybody is tired to rerun the same scans, redo the same analysis over and over again. It's hard to eventually overcome some of your own objections. I mean, many of you are lawyers in this work group today, which is, the risk-averse sharing of information that would be seen as license conclusions or legal advice can be problematic, of course. But I think in the end, we can agree that there's a lot of facts that we can share and that we can curate and crowdsource together. So the will and the need is there. I don't see yet a way to realize this. I hope we can. I have some ideas for projects in the space that would have to be around decentralized data. But the point is that we need to find a way to share the data, and everybody wants it. When I say share the data, that means share the scans, share information about this project where authors died 25 years ago, and what's the copyright for that? What's the license? All this research that we all do separately should be shared. And of course, we want to open the data, and I think we are going towards a world of open data, at least open data in our world. That means open knowledge base. The proprietary closed source alternatives are opaque, and we don't know how they're curated, how they're collected. We don't know what their coverage really is, and they're addicted to volume. And everybody speaks about number. Oh, I have 20 million package. I have 30. I have 50. It doesn't matter if the data you have is bad. What matters is having a way to have curated knowledge base, and eventually, because of the quality, I think they will become the norm and supplant and replace proprietary closed source alternative. The only way to make this happen in real is to join projects that want to do that, or start your own. And beyond just SBOM, I think there's an important thing, which to be able to share raw tools and raw scanners outputs. It's easy because they contain more metadata, more information, and they're really reusable. So think, for instance, if you have a scan code scan that run on Linux 4.13.3, if you were able to reuse it right away without having to rescan that, well, you're going to save a few megawatts of electricity and save the planet. So there's ecology benefits. But the raw point is sharing tools output, and as David was saying also, of course, being able to fix licensing upstream. It's difficult. It requires a lot of work. It's intensely social because you are saying to the maintainers of the upstream project, your licensing information is not right. So you need to have the right way to present this, discuss this, and ensure it's fixed upstream. But if the things were fixed upstream, then in the vast majority of the case, we would have fewer issues. I think there's ways to have leverage, and I heard somebody bring up issues about Debian and Alpine package licensing. If it's a problem, and I think it's a problem, Debian and Alpine will very much welcome putting together a project that's funded collectively maybe by members of this group that will very specifically help fix and clarify the license metadata so it's correct for all the Debian, all the Alpine package. We're talking about a lot of packages, but if you focus on the more common things that are used, say for Debian and Alpine, typically it's going to be used in Docker images and containers and server-side. There's a finite number of packages in the range of maybe several thousand. So it's not like crazy big. And if you're all suffering on that, we could put our energies to fix this so it's correct. Fix it upstream so it's correct not only for you as a group, but for everyone. And talking about opening the data, I still very much think that a centralized approach does not work very well. It's been tried with ClearDefine, for instance. The problem is that it's either too big to share, there's out-of-date tools or metadata, and frankly, the lack of trust in centralized control is difficult unless you have shared governance. So I think decentralized will help in the future.
Philippe, can you try to wrap it up in the next few minutes?
Yes. So I'll share very simply the insight directly. So licensing and security, we're dealing with both, but very different constituents and people. I'm not sure a lawyer cares too much about security and AppSec persons care too much about licensing. We want the tools to handle both. And for now, that's an advice from an open source program office. You should deal with both, but make sure you adapt your language and discourse to each persona and constituent, because otherwise you won't get traction. License compatibility, there's a lot of tools in the space that are emerging, open source tools, which try to automate how two licenses can be combined together. So it's really something to watch. Think about code matching and matching code snippets that may be reused. I think it's been always a problem because it's costly to review and it's still very costly. It's a domain that's been essentially abandoned by vendors like Snyk, which spun off FOSS-ID, or Synopsys, that essentially abandoned Protect. There's one open source entrant. The problem is I don't think it's still practical, especially with the volume explosion we see in open source reuse. Snippets are going to be less and less relevant. And with Copilot and ChatGPT and code that's being generated by AI, I think it's going to be even worse. It's like mixed feelings, but on the one hand, these are essentially massive snippet generators. So they will make, they could make snippet matching more relevant, yet they will make snippet matching relevant because everybody is going to use the same boilerplate, and it's going to be even harder there. I think though matching is still useful if you focus on big rocks being package whole stacks. And last, SBOMs. So we can see SBOMs everywhere, of course. There's issues about quality and whether it's high fidelity or low fidelity. Very few tools for consuming SBOMs at the moment. And there's a lot of issues when you want to integrate across tools. In some recent DocFest at SPDX, no two tools have ever been able to produce the same SBOM for the same package input. So that's difficult. There's a lot of work there to make sure we can have the breadth and depth of information we need in these. My advice is just make sure don't focus too much on SPDX versus CycloneDX. As long as they use Perl on those side, you'll be fine. Your vendors, your customers may demand one or the other, eventually you'll support both. But remember, it's just reporting formats. We've been very fixated on that. It brought a lot of attention on the domain. That's a good thing. But in the end, it's just as important as the color of the sheet of paper on which you write things. What matters is what you write on it. So that's it.
Okay.
Sorry if I took a bit more time. We started late, so that was an opportunity.
We started late. No, that's no, perfect.
That's an opportunity to finish later.
No, thanks for this input and interesting slides. And we will share the slides, so
yeah,
the list, and perhaps we can discuss more of this in our next meeting and give it some more space in our next meeting. But thank you, Philippe.
Sure.
So, Alexius, we agreed that you perhaps give a brief intro quickly into your talk, and also this one we'll pick up in our next meeting because we're running out of time here. In the meantime, while you get started, we will quickly put on here a little poll, a question about how many more meetings we want to have this year, and if you want to meet in person, and where we want to meet in person. So there's an option perhaps to meet in the middle of the year in June, or just after the the Bitkom FOSS event in Erfurt the next day. So depending on if you want to travel less than only once to Erfurt and be there 2 days, we could meet there. Or if you want to split it, because we already can discuss something at the FOSS event in Erfurt. If you want to split it and rather also be able to travel in June, we could meet in June. So there should be a poll just coming up now. Happy for your input, and then we decide how to go on with our next meetings. So, and Alexius now.
Right.
Yeah, it's your stage.
Right. So, yeah. Obviously, I do not have the time to go through the wonderful presentation about S-bombs and everything new and all the types of S-bombs and all the stuff that is happening. The good news is that if you're free tomorrow morning, Shane can share the information on there is the OpenChain general webinar, and I'll be talking about the same things at much length. So yeah, if you're anxious to hear it, you can join that one and hear it tomorrow morning. And so switching completely gears then and going to a different complete presentation. Let me see if I can. Whoa. Can you share? Do you see the shared open?
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, we're all discussing S-bombs, and I would have been talking about S-bombs and formats and all the wonderful SPDX activities that are happening. But this does not mean that we all know about S-bombs and we know what to do, right? You've seen the wonderful, everybody's seen the wonderful minimum viable S-bombs list from NTIA, and we're discussing now different S-bomb types. And, yeah, but there are still many questions that are not answered, right? And as Philippe just said, spending time discussing formats is not very productive, whether SPDX or CycloneDX is better or not, and stuff like that. We still have very crucial questions. So let me just pose a couple of them. So what's the scope of a SBOM, right? When do you produce a SBOM? Do you produce for everything? Do you produce for your proprietary software? Do you release for, if you release open source, do you also produce SBOMs? What about if you only do contributions to upstream? Do you produce SBOMs? For which customers do you produce SBOM? And when do you generate it? When it's released? Daily, you usually have a CD system that continues to deliver new versions, and when do you generate these SBOMs? All these are questions that we do not definitely have answers, and yeah. So what goes inside an SBOM, right? Do you only put the NTIA minimum elements or everything that you know, and which components, only what you put in there or the top level, or every transitive dependencies, or even dependencies that you do not distribute but you depend on, right? Or does it depend on use case? If the customer asks for this, then I put this, and otherwise I create another SBOM depending on the customer, right? And then we have visibility. Do you publish your SBOMs? Are visible to everyone? Do you also include all the license text to everyone, right? We're not discussing only open source licenses, we're discussing other licenses there, right? And how delivery, how do you actually ship your SBOM? Do you deliver along the site software, or do you put it on a website? Or then the website, is it publicly available again? The visibility custom, do you have access control, right? And the thing that you're doing will actually affect how you produce SBOM, right? If you want to use interconnected documents and pointers from one document to the other, you have to have these documents published somewhere, right? And then we have the wonderful legal questions. What does it mean to actually produce an SBOM, right? So even in the best of our intention, there might be inaccurate information there, right? Something might be missing, or something might be wrong, or we might have something in there that is not actually, that information is not reflected in the software. Does it have any legal ramification, and how do we do that, right? And yeah. So all these are unsolved questions. So whenever people are discussing SBOMs as a theoretical concept is nice, but having the processes and essentially how to integrate SBOMs into your software delivery are answers to all these questions. And the industry as a whole, we have not reached there, right? We don't know what to do in all these questions. We're trying to find answers. Everybody's making their own answers. Yeah, we, in the efforts of, groups like that and all OpenChain, we have to somehow define what we understand and what will be the common ground rules for all our industry. And yeah, 3 minutes, that was good.
Yeah, thanks. It was a good sneak preview for your presentation tomorrow. And as said, perhaps we pick this topic up in our next meeting. And but thank you for being flexible here today.
Marcel, perhaps what we can do is follow up on the mailing list to set the agenda for the next meeting. We know that we're going to bundle these topics in, but we can do the discussion of what else. And one thing I'd like to ask is, you have the distribution list for this meeting. I'm going to send an email to the German work group in the next few minutes with Alexios's webinar information. Perhaps you could also catch it and send it to this distribution list in case there's some people who are not on our normal mailing list.
Exactly. We will also share the link to list up for the German working group list. Yeah. After the meeting, and we will also share the presentation from today. And Alexios, Philippe, if you want to share your slides, please send them over. Then we will send it out to everyone. And also the meeting recording, once it's finished and complete, this will go out probably next week, and then everyone has all the information.
Yeah, I'm going to share the updated slide with you right away.
Perfect. And I think it would be great if we meet next time in person with a little bit more time, because as we see today, there are many things to discuss, and some more time would be great. And we have received the answers, and so we'll plan for the next meeting and let everyone know.
Perfect. And it'll be wonderful, for instance, if we do choose, say, at Erfurt around Bitkom, or if we choose elsewhere, let's have the face-to-face meeting and let's do a little social event afterwards, sponsored by OpenChain as well.
Thanks for this idea and invitation up front. And thanks for everyone joining today, and for the presentations from Alexius, Philippe, and Shane, and for everyone else who listened and participated. And then have a good rest of the day, good rest of the week, and then speak to you soon and see you soon.
Thank you indeed. And great comments, everyone. Thank you for this real community conversation. Let's take that feedback to the other projects and activities.